Okay, so track 6 on Alpha is called Joshua's Mistake. And, I like to keep my tragedies in pairs, apparently. My mother's illness was kind of the beginning of this long kind of descent into, you might say, depression. I was never clinically diagnosed, but it was just a terrible time. And, when she was sick and right after she died, I had some interest in this demo that I hawked around, and I didn't do anything about it. And I started playing in this other band, but I still had some songs kicking around that were like, really good, really memorable, catchy, but kind of like melancholy. I remember at the time, like late 90s, there was all this like, Counting Crows and Hootie and the Blowfish and the Gin Blossoms and Duncan Sheik. People were like, oh, you're like Duncan Sheik, but more cutting edge, And this is one of those songs, like a pop song with a little melancholy to it. Anyway, so I started writing about myself initially. Is this the life you wanted? The life you wanted to lead? And are you really happy with all the choices you made? I won't finish it. But so I got a job at a fraternity house. It was like, I wasn't in a fraternity at UCLA. I was like a hippie guy, played with a bunch of bands. That was my fraternity. But afterwards, I'd run out of money, and I was no longer able to like focus on music. And I'm a one-track mind, so I initially got a job like temping, and then I was hired by this fraternity to like be the sort of house dad, even though I was only a couple years older than the guys. And really, they wanted a fall guy, I think, basically. They needed somebody to live in the house because they'd had this terrible accident on Lake Mead where 2 of the boys had drowned, right? And so they needed to have somebody living, an adult presence in the house to make sure that like no one else died, And it happened outside of California, so there was the university couldn't kick them off fraternity row because they never got the toxicology reports. They could never prove that alcohol was involved, right? But it was believed to be the case. So I was living in this fraternity house, and then they eventually got kicked off the row for kidnapping. It was the most ridiculous thing. It wasn't really kidnapping, it was a prank, like the younger members like kidnapped an older guy. I think they rolled him up in a carpet. They were like running down the streets and cops were like, hey! Yeah, so that was the end of that fraternity for the time, silly story. And that was the end of my job. So thankfully, like I'd moved into this wonderful house where I stayed for years afterwards. It's the house that on Purdue Avenue in West LA that became known as Purdizzy. This old house from the 20s, this shotgun shack with really cheap rent. But without a job, I needed a roommate, okay? It was like a 2-bedroom house. So right when I lost that job, my friend Josh needed a place to stay. And Josh McGinn was a beautiful guy, handsome, just adorable little sprite. He was also a badass. He was like a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and stuff. But he had a darkness like you wouldn't believe, And he had just wrecked his life, one thing to the next. He'd gotten his high school girlfriend pregnant, which was okay. She had a beautiful daughter, but then he left Bakersfield to go to LA to get a job, to make more money. I don't know if he abandoned her or what, but when he got back, she was with a new guy. And so he wasn't part of his little girl's life. And then he like hooked up with this girl, this immigrant girl, like de-virginized her, which upset the dad, who was his boss, I think, the manager of this gym where he was working as a physical trainer. And so the dad wanted him dead. So what does he do? He runs off with the younger daughter on her 18th birthday. They elope and they get married. And So now he's married to this, I mean, he was 27. He's married to this 18-year-old. And they started having problems. Big surprise, right? And so he moved out of the place they lived together on Bagley, I remember. And he had a motorcycle, by the way, which I later inherited. This Honda Magna. And he wrecked it. So he'd had like all these things going on. He wrecked it badly enough that he broke his leg in 2 places. Didn't have health insurance, didn't have the money to get the surgery necessary to put the bones back together. A friend, Armand, saintly fellow, kicked in the money for the surgery. So Josh got his leg fixed. But he's in a cast. He can't work because he's a physical trainer, right? So he'd had a romantic breakup. He'd had an accident. His health was, under stress or whatever. He couldn't work. He had no money. He moves in with me. And I'm like, we were very good friends, and Josh loved me and I loved him back, so we had no problems. But, when he moved in, I thought he was on the rebound, that was the whole deal, but he wasn't. He moved in, actually, I say, it's Thanksgiving, a cause for celebration. I think he moved in with me the week of Halloween. That doesn't work as well lyrically. And the main thing was, once he got settled, it was like the build up to Thanksgiving, which is special for me because it's my birthday. It actually is this year, it's on my birthday. It's not always, but it's usually the week of. It's always the week of. So he moved in with me, and I was like, everything's gonna be okay, you'll meet a new person, your leg's gonna be fine, you'll get back to work. And I wasn't sweating him for rent money, but he did pay the money for November and for December, and then Christmas rolled around. And it's like, my mom died. Christmas is December 25th, her birthday was December 29th. She died January 6th. A lot of people, they make it through the holidays, and then immediately after the holidays, there's this dip when it's like, what do I have to, live for, right, in the immediate future? So the lead up to Christmas, I was broke. As I said, I needed a roommate to pay the bills myself. And I was going back to Dallas. I was going to drive to Dallas because I couldn't afford a plane ticket and collect some acoustic foam for recording purposes at my sister Monica's new house. She bought a house from a musician. So I drove there and was able to drive back with the acoustic foam. So the drive from LA to Dallas and back again, that's 2 days each way. And then I had some time with the family. And then I had some other friends who were in Vegas for New Year's. So it worked out. On the way back, I stopped off in Las Vegas to spend New Year's there. Excuse me. And so there was this period of time where I was not home, which is unfortunate because if I were there, what I'm about to tell you would not have happened. And I've been through, I don't have survivor's guilt or anything, but it's unfortunate because Josh was alone at Christmas time with so much, on his chest. I interviewed the head of the American Institute of Suicidology for a piece I did for Spin Magazine on the death of Elliott Smith, which was, he died under mysterious circumstances. But in my research, it seemed like it was definitely a suicide. Josh's father had committed suicide at 27 or 28 with a gun. He'd had this, difficulty with the daughter he wasn't involved in raising. The falling out with the family, his father-in-law now, right? The fighting with his now wife, the 18-year-old. Then there was the accident, the injury, then the surgery, and then he couldn't work, and he had no money, and then it was the holidays, and he was alone. And he was alone right after Christmas. And I was in Las Vegas for New Year's Eve. This is now end of 2001, going into 2002. And I was thinking about Josh because when I left to drive to Dallas, I knew he'd been reading his Tibetan Book of the Dead. And Josh was like a very cosmic dude, you know. I think, did he believe in Jesus or was it more, you know, Krishna, right? I think both, you know. But he believed in some kind of afterlife or reincarnation, I'm not sure. But he was always talking about nothingness and what a gift that is, you know, nirvana, right? And whereas a lot of forward-thinking people use that as a way to like de-stress and like not get upset about things in life, he used that as an excuse to check out. So, New Year's Eve, there was the countdown, right? And 10, 9, 8, and hey, Happy New Year. And at, 12 o'clock and 30 seconds, I called Josh. I had a cell phone then. I called him, and he didn't pick up. I called the house phone. It was a landline, my phone. And I called him, and I was like, Josh, it's Liam, I want to tell you I love you, man, and I'll see you soon. 2002 is going to be a great year. Everything's going to work out, We're going to have so much fun. We're going to have a great year. But I think I forgot to say the last words I said to him before I left were, be here when I get back. And so when I got back, it was actually January 2nd. I spent all of the 1st and then the next day there. We checked out. And then I drove back from Vegas. So I got back to the house on Purdue like 7:30 maybe, 7. And the first thing I had to do was pee because I've been driving like on the highway the whole time. So I parked the car, run in through the back door, and the moment I opened the back door, I'm hit by this like the worst smell I've ever smelled. But I looked down, the garbage was right there, and it was overflowing. And there was like, it looked chaotic in the kitchen. I remember there was a glass of red wine knocked over, and the red liquid was like congealed on the countertop. And I was like, oh God, like take out the garbage, man. And because of the layout of Purdue, I could see through the kitchen and through the open front door, bedroom, I could see his legs. And Josh used to meditate, right? And I thought, well, maybe he's taking a nap or he's meditating. So I go through the back bedroom into the Jack and Jill connecting bathroom, and I pee. But the door to the bathroom was open, and again, I could see his legs. And I'm like talking to him or whatever. I'm like, yeah, it's good to be back, blah, blah, blah. And then he's not saying anything. And I'm thinking I'm gonna go back and get my, luggage, my acoustic foam. And then I thought, no, something's wrong. And I'm like repressing because I knew he was in dire straits. So I went into the front bedroom, and his head was down. I didn't see the gun in his hand, or the phone in the other hand. I just bent down, and I looked into his eyes, and I realized what the smell was when I walked into the house, because it had been a couple of days. We can account for his whereabouts up until like 10:30 New Year's Eve. And I know, Josh, this was a countdown. This was a New Year's resolution to not be, And so I looked at his hands, he had a gun in one hand and my phone in the other. And literally, I know, stroke of midnight, he's doing himself in, and that phone is just about to ring. And hearing's like the last sense to go. He would have heard that phone ringing while he was still maybe alive. And it was me calling to say everything's going to be okay, Of course it wasn't. As soon as I realized, I burst into tears, and I called 911, and the police came, and then the coroner, and it was a very strange time. I just had an argument with a couple of friends, and I was in a really bad mood and looking forward to talking to Josh because we got along fine. But there was such a dark side to it. He left this little book of poetry. I didn't tell her now, but there was a note to his wife, and it was like, just know that as I died, I was reaching out to you. because they'd had an argument like at 11 o'clock on New Year's Eve. And so on his way out the door, he's like, oh, by the way, it was all your fault. Just like, what a terrible thing to do. And he was not a malevolent person. I didn't tell her at the time, I didn't tell her about that because I didn't think she needed to know. But what a terrible thing to do. And it was just so sad. A terrible thing to do to his mother, to do to his daughter. And so the chorus, is this the life you wanted? And it became the life you wanted to leave. The life you wanted to leave instead of leave. Right? Anyway. And are you really happy with all the choices you made? Resigning yourself to fate? Or was it just a mistake? Was it just a mistake? If you could do it all over again, would you do it differently? And of course I'll never know, because he's not here to answer those questions. But at least I got a song out of it. Yeah, so that song is my conversation, the conversation that would have taken place if I could have spoken to him. And that's another song.